My son humiliated me 19 times in front of his dinner guests over the course of a single Friday evening in October. Not once did he raise his voice or break his polished composure. He was far too calculating for that. Every dismissal was a quiet, precise little cut, delivered with a smile and a cufflink adjustment, designed to remind the room that I was nothing more than an embarrassing afterthought in what he called his home. So the morning after, he left for a 4-day sales conference in Phoenix. I sold the house he spent 3 years pretending he owned, and I had every stick of furniture packed into a commercial storage unit before his return flight touched down. Before I go any further, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that the people we sacrifice everything for should be held to account when they throw it back in our faces, hit subscribe. You are going to want to see how this ends. My name is Gus. I am 67 years old, and for 38 years I worked as a licensed master electrician in Central Tennessee. I built a business from a single service van and a borrowed tool belt into a company that employed 41 people and held commercial contracts with 3 of the largest developers in the state. I did not inherit a single dollar. I built everything I have with wire cutters in my back pocket and calluses thick enough to stop a blade. I paid my son's college tuition in full. I put the down payment on his first car. I wrote the check that covered his first year of business school without blinking. I believed in him the way a man can only believe in his own child, with a particular blindness that is nearly indistinguishable from love. My son's name is Cole. He is 34, a regional sales manager for a commercial lighting supplier, and he has not gone a single day of his adult life without spending money he does not quite have. He married my daughter-in-law 6 years ago. She is 31, beautiful in the specific way that requires significant maintenance, and she has a talent for making every room feel like an audition. I liked her once. I kept trying to like her long after I should have stopped. 4 years ago, I purchased a house in a quiet suburb outside of Nashville through a limited liability company I had set up years earlier called Iron Ridge Holdings. The property was a 4-bedroom craftsman-style home on a corner lot, assessed at $940,000. I paid cash. I kept my name off every public document. The house belonged to Iron Ridge Holdings, and I was the sole member of Iron Ridge Holdings, and absolutely no one in my family knew any of this. I offered Cole and my daughter-in-law the opportunity to live there at a subsidized rent, $300 a month, routed through a management company, so they never saw my fingerprints on the transaction. I told them I knew a fellow from my old Rotary Club who owned the property and was looking for long-term renters. The plan was simple. I wanted them to build stability. I wanted them to live in a good home in a good school district, to get their feet under them, to grow into the kind of people who treat a house with gratitude because they understand what it costs. Instead, they stopped treating it like a house and started treating it like a trophy. And they started treating me like a piece of old furniture that had not been thrown out yet. I lived in the lower level, a finished basement suite with its own side entrance, a small kitchen, a narrow bed, and a workbench I built myself the first month I moved in. I kept to my side of the house. I did my own laundry, cooked my own meals, and asked for nothing. But Cole and my daughter-in-law had decided somewhere in the first year that my presence was both useful and embarrassing simultaneously. Useful when a pipe rattled or a breaker tripped. Embarrassing the rest of the time. My son had taken to referring to the lower level as the in-law suite at dinner parties, with a pained and gracious expression, as if accommodating me were a burden he carried with quiet dignity. My daughter-in-law introduced me to her friends as Cole's father, who is staying with us for now, with a weight on "for now" that made the arrangement sound temporary and reluctant. The Friday dinner party was my son's largest social ambition to date. He had invited his regional director, a man I will call Hargrove, along with 4 other couples from the company's Southeast sales team. 12 people seated at the table that night. I was not among them. I was the one refilling water pitchers. Cole had approached me that morning with the easy authority he had been practicing for years. He said the caterer was handling the food, but that he could use a hand, keeping things moving during the meal. He said it casually, the way you ask a neighbor to watch your dog, as if the favor were minor, the presumption entirely reasonable. I did not argue. I nodded and went back to reading the newspaper. By 6 o'clock, the house smelled like rosemary chicken and expensive candles. I had changed into clean slacks and a pressed button down. I was not going to be invisible. I was going to be quiet. The first indignity came before the guests arrived. My daughter-in-law walked into the kitchen where I was arranging a breadbasket and looked at my shirt with an expression I can only describe as polite regret. She asked if I owned anything without a collar, something a little more background. I told her I was comfortable. She pursed her lips and walked away. I started counting. 1. The guests arrived in a parade of good cologne and pressed blazers. Cole greeted each couple at the door with the firm but warm handshake of a man who has rehearsed it. I stood near the kitchen with a tray of sparkling water, and one by one, the guests took glasses from me without making eye contact. 2. Hargrove, my son's regional director, was a broad-shouldered man with silver hair and the unhurried confidence of someone who has been important for a long time. He noticed me near the kitchen door and paused. He asked Cole who I was. My son laughed the way he does when he is performing warmth. He said, "Oh, that's my dad. He's been with us since my mom passed. We try to keep him busy." He patted his director on the arm and steered him toward the living room without giving me a name. Hargrove glanced back at me with something that might have been apology in his eyes. I nodded once and stepped into the kitchen. 3. I moved through the first hour of the evening the way I have moved through most difficult things in my life. Steadily, with my hands occupied and my mouth closed. I refilled glasses. I cleared the cocktail plates. No one spoke to me, and I spoke to no one. 4 came when my daughter-in-law passed me in the hallway carrying a charcuterie board and said, just loud enough for the couple standing nearby to hear, "Make sure you eat something before you head downstairs, okay? There's plenty." The same voice you use when you leave a bowl of food out for a stray. 5 and 6 arrived together. Cole was walking his director through the living room, gesturing at the crown molding and the built-in bookshelves with proprietary pride. I had built those shelves myself, 2 weekends before they moved in, using hand-selected white oak I drove 3 hours to find at a specialty lumber yard in Kentucky. I had spent 4 days on them. Cole pointed at them and told his director that a local craftsman had done the built-ins, but that he was planning to update them eventually because the finish was a little rustic for what we're going for. His director admired them. Cole shrugged. 5. Then Cole turned, noticed me standing near the hallway, and said, without looking at me fully, "Can you check on the water situation in the dining room?" He turned back to his conversation before I could respond. 6. I went to check on the water situation in the dining room. Somewhere near the middle of the evening, I slipped downstairs to collect myself. I walked to the back corner of the basement suite, where I kept my personal belongings. A standing wardrobe, a filing cabinet, and a cedar hope chest I had built for my wife Dorothy on our 25th anniversary. I had spent 4 months on that chest. I cut the dovetail joints by hand and carved her initials into the lid. In block letters I practiced on scrap pine for 2 weeks before I trusted my hands to do it on the real piece. When Dorothy died 3 years ago, I packed her letters, her photographs, and the small tokens of our life together carefully inside it. It was the most important object I owned. The chest was gone. I stood in the corner where it had sat for 2 years and stared at the empty floor. There was a faint rectangular mark in the carpet where the feet had rested. I went upstairs. I walked through the house until I found it in the front entryway, positioned next to the coat rack, being used as a decorative storage bench for umbrellas and a basket of pine cones. I opened the lid. It was empty. Not empty the way you empty something carefully. Empty the way you clear out a drawer you need for something else. I went back downstairs and found a cardboard box shoved behind the water heater. Inside it, stacked without their envelopes, were Dorothy's letters, her photographs, a small pressed rose from our wedding boutonniere, 3 decades of a marriage reduced to packing material. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment. I thought about Dorothy. I thought about the way she used to say that the measure of a man is not what he builds but what he protects. Then I went back upstairs and kept working. 7 through 12 came in a rapid, ugly cluster during dinner itself. Cole snapped his fingers at me from across the table when he wanted the water pitcher refilled. Actual finger snapping, in front of 12 people, the way you signal a server when you are in a hurry and not thinking of them as a person. 7. My daughter-in-law asked me in front of the entire table whether I had remembered to take my blood pressure medication that morning. the specific tone of a caretaker managing someone who cannot be trusted to manage themselves. 8. A woman at the table said something kind to my daughter-in-law about the bookshelves in the living room and asked about the craftsman. My daughter-in-law smiled and said, "Cole's father used to do odd jobs before he retired. He keeps himself busy down there." Used to. Odd jobs. Down there. 9, 10, 11 in a single breath. 12 came when I brought a fresh bread basket to the table, and Cole, without looking at me, said to Hargrove, "He means well." I had not said a word. I had set down bread. He means well. After dinner, the group moved to the back porch for drinks. I stayed in the kitchen, working through the first round of dishes, and through the open window, I heard my son's voice carrying clearly across the cool Tennessee night. I recognized the rhythms before I caught the words. The slight lean into false modesty. The setup designed to make the listener feel they were receiving a confidence. Honestly, Cole was saying, what was I going to do? He didn't plan properly for retirement. A lot of guys from his generation, they just worked until they couldn't, and then there wasn't anything there. It's not his fault. He did the best he could with what he understood. Brooke and I made the decision to let him stay, and I think it's been good for him. He fixes things around the house. It gives him a sense of purpose. He did not plan properly. I set down the dish I was holding. I stood still at the kitchen counter, while someone on the porch murmured something sympathetic, and my son accepted it with gracious humility. 13 through 19 arrived in the hours that followed. A hand waved dismissively when I appeared in a doorway, my name used as the punchline of a story I was only half meant to hear. 3 separate requests that I retrieve items from the garage, while guests watched me go. My daughter-in-law loudly wondering whether I had locked my side door. Again, in front of 2 women who smiled at me with the particular pity reserved for the elderly and the harmless. By the time the last car left the driveway, I had finished counting. I went downstairs. I unlocked the small fireproof safe I kept under my workbench and removed 2 things. The first was the original operating agreement for Iron Ridge Holdings, my name listed as sole member. The second was a cell phone, not the device Cole had set up for me on his own account, which I used politely and said almost nothing on. This was my private line, used only for business matters. I sat on the edge of the bed and called a man named Ward. Ward is a real estate attorney who has handled my affairs for 22 years. He is methodical and does not alarm easily. When I told him what I had found in the cardboard box behind the water heater, he was quiet for a moment and said he was sorry. When I told him what I had heard on the back porch, he was quiet for another moment, then asked what I needed. I told him to run a full title search on the property first thing in the morning. He called back before 8 o'clock the next day. His voice had changed. He told me that 3 months earlier, a quitclaim deed had been recorded with the County Register of Deeds, purportedly signed by me, transferring ownership of the property from Iron Ridge Holdings directly to my son. The notarization was dated on a Tuesday afternoon. I had been in Chattanooga that Tuesday attending a friend's funeral. I had hotel receipts, a fuel card transaction, and a guest registry that placed me 300 miles from Nashville. The signature on that deed was not mine. Ward told me there was more. My son had used the fraudulent deed as the foundation for a home equity line of credit application at a regional bank. He had been approved for $180,000. He had already drawn $30,000 of it. That was no longer 19 indignities at a dinner party. That was deed fraud. That was mortgage fraud. That was forgery. At its simplest, it was my son stealing the house I had bought with my own hands so he could fund a life he could not afford. Ward said he could flag the forgery with the county recorder and the bank within the hour. He said he could have investigators involved before morning. He asked how I wanted to proceed. I told him I did not want investigators. Not yet. A man who is arrested on a Saturday can spend the weekend telling people he made a desperate mistake under pressure. He can frame himself as someone who cracked under stress. I was not interested in leaving him that doorway. I told Ward to find a buyer, cash transaction. I needed it closed before my son landed back in Nashville. Ward asked whether I understood the finality of what I was authorizing. I told him I did. He said he would have buyers at the table by 10 o'clock the next morning. Cole knocked on my basement door at 7:15 the following day. He was dressed for the airport, rolling bag beside him, laptop case over one shoulder. He was holding a manila folder and wearing the pleasant, unhurried expression he uses when he expects to get what he came for. He told me there were some bank documents that needed my signature, an insurance rider on the property. Routine annual paperwork would not take more than a minute. He set the folder on my workbench without asking whether I wanted to look at it, uncapped a pen, and held it out to me. I looked at the folder. I did not open it. I told him that my right hand had been giving me serious trouble the past 2 days. I held it up and curled the fingers slowly, letting my face register pain. I said the cold had gotten into the joints overnight. I said I could barely hold a coffee mug. Cole's jaw tightened. He asked if I could try. I reached for the pen. I let it drop from my fingers to the concrete floor. He picked it up without a word and extended it again. I shook my head and told him my doctor had said not to force it, that the inflammation could take weeks to settle if I pushed. I told him I would be happy to sign whatever he needed the moment he returned from Phoenix. That 4 days would give everything time to calm down, that surely whatever it was could wait. My daughter-in-law appeared in the doorway. She looked at the folder. She looked at me. She looked at my son. Cole said, very quietly, "Fine." He said he would handle it when he returned. He picked up the folder. He told me not to do anything heavy while they were gone. He said it like a warning disguised as concern. I nodded and told him to have a safe flight. I stood at my basement window and watched the car back out of the driveway at 8:40. I waited 5 full minutes after it disappeared around the corner. Then I straightened up, flexed both hands, joints perfectly fine, and called Ward. I told him the property was clear. By 10 o'clock, Ward was on the front porch with a team from a residential acquisition group that specialized in rapid all-cash purchases. We sat at the kitchen counter. I would not use the dining room for this, and I signed the accelerated sale documents on a legal pad, both hands completely steady, no hesitation in my fingers. The wire transfer confirmed at 11:52. The transaction was complete. The moving crew arrived at noon. 4 trucks and 24 men in matching gray uniforms carrying packing tape, quilted blankets, and stacked cardboard boxes. I gave them one instruction: pack every item in that house as if it were going to a museum. Nothing scratched, nothing missing, nothing left behind. I was taking away my son's home, but I was not going to let him say I had ransacked it. The precision of the packing was its own kind of message. I walked through the house one last time while they worked. I stopped at the bookshelves in the living room. The white oak shelves I had cut and sanded and stained on a cold November weekend 2 years ago, the ones my son had planned to eventually rip out because they were a little rustic for what he was going for. I ran a hand along one of the shelves. The wood was smooth and tight. The joints were clean. Good work does not care whether it is appreciated. I walked to the entryway. I opened the lid of the cedar hope chest. I lifted Dorothy's letters and photographs carefully from the cardboard box behind the water heater and placed them back inside the chest where they belonged, in the right order, in their envelopes. I closed the lid and rested my hand on her carved initials for a moment. Then I told the crew to wrap the chest in moving blankets, 3 layers deep, and load it into my truck. Everything else went to the storage unit on Route 12. By late afternoon, the house was stripped back to its walls. The commercial security contractor had installed keypad locks on every door. No backup keyholes, no override. A uniformed guard was stationed at the front porch. I loaded my 2 bags into my truck, shook Ward's hand in the driveway, and drove away. I did not look at the house as I left. Cole's flight landed at 6:47 Tuesday evening. His wife had flown back a day earlier. She was already at the house, trying her key in the new lock, when his ride dropped him at the curb. The security guard's written report documented what followed. My son tried every door. He circled the house twice. He pounded on the front door and called my name until the neighbor's porch lights came on. When he finally acknowledged the uniformed guard standing on the front steps, the guard informed him, calmly and completely, that the property had been transferred to a commercial holding company and that he was standing on private property without authorization. My son told the guard that he owned the house. The guard told him that no, he did not. I had parked down the block and waited. When I saw the neighbor's porch lights flicker on, I knew the moment had arrived. I started the truck, drove up slowly, and let the headlights find them in the driveway. My son was standing with his suitcase at his feet, and his expensive suit wrinkled from the flight, and for the first time in a very long time he looked exactly like the boy he actually was. I got out of the truck. I walked toward him. I did not hurry. He started talking before I was close enough to hear him clearly. Something about a misunderstanding, about paperwork, about rights. He used the word attorney twice. I stopped in front of him and held out a plain envelope. He took it. Inside was a one-page summary, the Iron Ridge Holdings operating agreement with my name on it, the recorded sale document transferring the property to the buyer, and a county clerk's printout showing the fraudulent quitclaim deed flagged and voided as of that morning. Underneath those was a key card to the climate-controlled storage facility on Route 12, and a printed inventory of every item packed inside. He read it slowly. His wife came and stood at his shoulder. I watched her face move through several expressions before it settled on one I had never seen on her before, which was fear. My son looked up from the envelope. His mouth was slightly open. He looked at the house, at the security guard, at the documents in his hand, and then back at me. He asked, very quietly, what they were supposed to do now. I thought about the back porch and the story he had told his colleagues about a man who had not planned properly. I thought about the handshake he gave his director instead of a father's name. I thought about Dorothy's letters in a cardboard box behind a water heater. I told him I heard IKEA had some nice shelving options, very current, nothing rustic. Then I got back in my truck and drove north. I did not hear from my son for 4 months. When I did, it came through Ward, a letter from his attorney requesting that I consider dropping the deed fraud referral to the county prosecutor. I did not consider it. The bank had already launched their own fraud investigation and was pursuing recovery of the drawn funds. I was told his company became aware of the situation in the weeks that followed. I do not know the details of what came after that, and I have found that I do not need to know them. His wife left him in January. I received this information the way you receive news about weather in a city you no longer live in. I bought a small property in Middle Tennessee, 2 bedrooms, 3 acres on the edge of a reservoir, a house that needed significant electrical work, which I was more than qualified to handle. I set the cedar hope chest beside the window that looks out over the water. I placed Dorothy's letters back inside in their proper order. The first morning I was there, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat outside in a folding chair, while the herons worked the shallows at the far edge of the reservoir. There was not a single thing I needed to fix. I want to say one thing to anyone watching this who has a son or daughter they have given everything to, who is starting to wonder whether the love is flowing in only one direction. I held the decision I made in my hands for a long time before I made it. I turned it over. I looked for another path. I wanted to find one. But I have spent nearly 4 decades running electrical wire through walls. And the one thing that work teaches you is that current will always find the path of least resistance. The only way to change where the power flows is to change the circuit. My son had learned, over 34 years, that there was no consequence he could not outlast because I was his father and I would absorb it. He was correct that the love would hold. He was wrong about what love is for. Love is not a loophole. I changed the circuit. The herons are back this morning. The coffee is strong and the reservoir is flat and still. My hands are steady. That is more than enough.